Greetings, my name is Mandy Young, and my passion is taking people on wilderness encounters to observe wild animals, swim with dolphins, walk with the Maasai and the Bushmen. And I like to be able to make it possible for people to get life-changing personal and professional insights from these experiences. As we can't really be traveling much at the moment, I've gone online with the weekly wilderness webinar. And today I have Mike with me from Johannesburg. He is part of an amazing innovation, the Destiny Club. He has a real passion for people transformations, especially spiritually. And he's a very innovative, out-of-the-box thinker. So we've just watched a video about a very unusual friendship between a lion and an oryx, usually predator and prey. And Mike and I are just going to chat a little bit about what that meant for us in terms of our own perceptions and understandings of the wild, but also of ourselves. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Nice to be here, and thank you for your kind words. They undeserved words, but still thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
Oh, thanks for joining me today. So, Mike, this was a really unusual interaction to see a lioness who would normally pounce on a young oryx and would be her preferred meal of the day. And here instead we see not only them kind of side by side, but her actively trying to care and protect this little creature. Any thoughts or ideas that came out of that for you?
My first thought, Mandy, when I looked at that was, although it's very, very unusual without a doubt, yet nonetheless, I think that is a basic instinct that we have. And I mean, if you go to Genesis in the Bible, where we were made in the image of God and we were instructed to look after the world, to take care of the world. That was his command to us. And I think he built that instinct into us. So I think that what happens in the world today, the world crowds in and we change, and we have changed. But if you take that away, like in the lioness and the oryx, the little buck, right, there's nothing crowding in there, and a natural instinct comes out within. It's a helpless young, right? And I'm not denying anything that the lady was saying. I think there's probably a lot to what she was saying, but I think that natural instinct comes through, right, to protect the young. And you see that with people. You see that with a lot of people. I mean, although we get a lot of abuse in children, even some of the most wicked people, when they see a young child in danger or battling, will actually bend down to help that child. Will actually, you'll see something come out of them. Not often, but you'll see it. And there's that thing that comes out, male or female, to protect the child, to help the child. So I think it's. Sorry.
Like if we're in a healthy state of mind, our more natural inclination is to care for the young and protect them.
Yeah, I think without a doubt, if we're in a healthy state of mind, but I think that even so, when I was talking about anybody, I think even a person, I mean, it can be, and you see this up quite often in movies and that, but it can be the most hardened criminal. And a little baby comes along, a child comes along, and he softens. Something in him softens, and he protects that child. He doesn't pick it up and just throw it out the window, right? He might be gruff and say, "Get along, kid, go away there." But he'll follow the child and he'll look after the child. He'll realize the child is not going to make it, and he will just somehow, this instinct will come out. So I believe that's a natural inbred instinct that's put into us by the Lord. It's a survival instinct, right? And I think it is a case of how we live with everything else. Unfortunately, because we're in a fallen world, all that falls away 9 times out of 10. And I could just imagine that line of saying, "You're a typical male. Here am I doing all I can to save that little thing." And along comes a man and eats it up. We'd be labeled once again.
What do you feel about when it's because it isn't although it is our natural instinct, and you would say that lioness had a natural instinct to protect something young and vulnerable, but the normal instinct for a lioness is to hunt the young or the weak, and the reason for that is for genetic strength, if you're a predator in the wild and you manage to catch something, it's usually the something that you manage to catch has a weaker genetic pool than something that has a stronger genetic pool that can run and get away.
Yes.
Um, so I think some of the things that I understand from a little bit I've read about this lioness, I think she was given a name called um, Kamanyak, something like that, which in the Kenyan language means blessed. And apparently, over a couple of years, she actually looked after 6 different oryx in this kind of way.
Wow.
Eventually, the 7th one she ate.
I just got a bit too much.
I think that the mothering instinct finally ran out. But I
Yes.
think what happened for her is often with lionesses, mothering is a communal thing. You know, the lionesses kind of support one another in rearing the cubs.
Hmm.
Initially, a lioness will go off and have her cubs on her own, but she'll return to the pride. But what happens, and you might say this is typical male, but what happens with male lions, which is not always very nice for us to accept, really, is that when they come into a pride and they take over a pride from a dominant male that used to be looking after that pride, the first thing they will do is what they call infanticide. They'll eat the cubs, and the
Oh,
reason for eating the cubs is that they want to mate with the lionesses as soon as possible to pass on their genetic strength. So it seems very abusive and awful from our human perspective. But in terms of lion pride survival, it's very important in terms of passing on the strongest genes. And apparently, this particular pride was decimated for some reason. So, this young lioness was separated from her pride. And I think that some of the questions that came into my mind actually is as a young lioness, she hadn't had enough mothering, maybe herself. And sometimes I know in my psychotherapy practice, sometimes working with people who haven't had enough mothering, the first thing they do is want to be a mother and have a child until the child arrives. And then it's too much for them to handle. And I kind of got a little bit of a picture of this with her because when this child, this Oryx, arrived, all this mothering protective instinct kicked in, but she wasn't very good at looking after it. You know, first of all, trying to look after an oryx makes it impossible for that lioness to hunt. You know, and I know you didn't get a chance. I've watched the video a couple of times, but you see along her, you can see her spine sticking out. She's so
hmm.
thin, you know, and both her and oryx are starving because the oryx can't feed from her. She has no breast milk and she can't hunt for to feed herself. So it's a non sort of workable situation, and sadly. So although the male lion came in there and did what is normal for a male lion to do, he probably saved her from starving.
Yeah, and so Mandy, I would actually agree with you there because the second thought that I would have had there was that she was out of her normal environment, the lioness,
Sure.
right? So she was. You were talking about the mothering being the maternal instinct. It's a communal type thing with the lionesses, right?
Sure.
She was obviously out of that. She was obviously on her own. Or pretty well much on her own. So she wasn't subject to the influences of what the tribe or the group would be doing normally.
Sure.
I think, yeah, what you say enhances it. The fact that she probably didn't have enough mothering. Maybe she was abandoned or got, you said the tribe was decimated, so she was separated from the tribe at an early age. So you've got two animals there in similar circumstances, and it doesn't matter if you're a lion or an elephant or an oryx, right? It doesn't really make any difference. You're just a being, a creature that is in a dire circumstance trying to survive, right? And so the lioness was trying to survive. Yes, the natural instinct should have been to want to eat the buck, but for some reason it didn't. The maternal instinct and the desire to be mothered kicked in over and above that,
Sure.
right? It was a far stronger instinct, and to help this young creature, even though the young creature would have helped her survive. Okay, the instinct was to help the young
Sure.
creature survive. but she didn't have the tools to do it with. She didn't have the, she was totally like a fish out of water. There was nothing that she really could do. She say, I didn't notice, but I will look at the video again. I didn't see the spine and all that sort of thing, but I think you're quite correct. I'm sure that's the situation. So I think again, as human beings, you can get wealthy people, you get strong people, you can get weak people, all sorts of people, drug addicts, doesn't really matter what it is. But when two people from two different sectors get thrown together, right, and they're thrown together in a similar circumstance of despair or destruction or things are going wrong, I think the norms that we've learned because of the fallen world drop away, and the instincts inside for survival and for living together outweigh those. They come to the fore. Not every time, but I'm just suggesting that that might, when you see situations of people helping out others, when they're separated, and so I could be doing very well, and then suddenly I'm on the bones of my butt, right? I've lost everything, right? And I come across somebody who's starving outside, and I got a roll in my hand. My instinct is to give him the roll to eat rather than eat it myself, right?
Or maybe even to share it.
Or to share it, but he may be so hungry that he grabs the whole thing and eats it, right? Like, I mean, the little cub was taking all the lioness's time.
Sure.
But it was so, yeah, no, I agree with you. To share it would be the answer, would be the thing. But I say that instinct, and it's quite intriguing because I think that's what's built inside of us. That's who we are. And when we look at people, I think we need to look at people that way. We need to try and understand that people, I want to say, are basically good. I think that that's the way we're born. I think that the condition of the world, or the world situation, conditions us to, right from when we're in the womb, because as I understand it, I'm not an expert in this, but I understand it, when the child's in the womb, they know what's going on outside. They can pick up anger and fear and all these type of things so I believe in the womb, and that can actually be transmitted to them. So I think that, yes, so from the time a child is formed, I think it's subjected to what we see in the fallen world today, and that's why we come out like we are. If you could put them into a perfect circumstance, they come out good. We are intrinsically, basically good, sound people with a desire to survive and to live with each other. I'm just saying that.
How do you feel about, obviously that was an attempt across species. And as humans, reaching out to nature, that's kind of across species. So I can hear what you're saying is that people have a normal tendency to really reach out to those who are struggling or vulnerable in some way, people who are weaker than we are at the time. There's, if we are intrinsically good, that's something we would want to do. How do you feel about that across species? Like if it was a kitten or a puppy or a young duckling or something like that, would you have, what do you think is the value? Okay, so answer that question, then I have a different question.
Okay, I'm trying to, I'm not quite sure I understand what the question is. Are you saying if it was a kitten in the same circumstance, or reaching out to a kitten?
Yeah, because a kitten is a different species to a human. So I'm saying, yes, this was a cross-species interaction between a lion and an oryx. They were different species.
Yes.
And it would be natural for a young lioness to look after her own cub.
But not the oryx.
But this was a cross-species interaction. If we were to apply this to ourselves as people, what is helpful and unhelpful in terms of reaching out across species, would you say? Like to another species, like a dolphin, a lion, an elephant, a dog, a cat, a duck, all those would be across species for us.
Yeah, I guess it's, I think it's a pretty hard question to answer from the point of view that I mean, if you think of a lion, you're not going to get out of your car and go pat the lion. It's going to chow you. You don't even go near an elephant. It's going to crush you. I mean, we just had a case out here of that young ranger who loved it, a 27-year-old up in the Eastern Transvaal, and there was a mother came around the corner. I don't know what happened, and he was just trying to get it away, and the thing charged him and pierced him with his tusk, and he died. And it was horrendous, stamped him and so on. He was reaching out to the elephant. He was not firing guns or shooting. He was not a threat to the elephant. The elephant didn't reach back. So I think it's a difficult situation, question. If you're talking about a young kitten or a young lion, I mean, something that's helpless, I think, yeah, you can reach out to those. I think people do all the time. They reach out to across the species, absolutely no problems. I think there's again that our shame instinct, builds our shame. Look at that poor thing. Let me help it. I think that comes to all of us. I think there are many people who are cut off from it. They're very hardened, right, which is a shame. But I think for the average person, yeah, the average person will look at it and think, well, what can I do to help it, right? How can I go? What can I do to help it? And if it's possible, we'll try and do something, even if it's just picking it up and dropping it off at a vet's place. If it's a kitten, they pick it up and go and drop it off at and you see many stories of that.
And then the
But
second question then would be similar, would bring in what we saw with the lion and the oryx, but also what we saw with the young ranger and the elephant mother. In what situations does taking care of something else weaker, let's just say something else weaker, not necessarily a baby, something else weaker, in what situations is taking care of something else weaker within our own species or across species going to compromise survival as opposed to enhancing survival? Quite a hard question.
yeah, again, I think there's a basic answer to that, a basic thing inside of us, but I think it's a very difficult thing to apply. I think our natural instinct is survival of the fittest, survival of ourselves. So no matter whether it's the same species or animals, what have you, our instinct is to look at our own survival first, right? So we put that paramount, then we put in the survival of the other creature underneath. But again, you do get the stories. You see it often, like the lion and oryx, which is a very unusual story, and it's not something that happens every day. You will see that situation where people have died for other species. They've died trying to save the lion, died trying to save whatever it happens to be. I want to give an analogy of the same species of what happened to me when I drove down to Africa, just what I felt, and which I think is, I'm going to say it again. I think it's a natural thing built into us by the Lord, right? I think when we're born, this is what is put into us. The good things are put into us, not the evil things. The evil things come from the fallen world, and they overshadow the bad things. So I think the power of what is in us will kick in. So if I can give the analogy, I came down in '67. I drove down through Africa in a Jeep, a little old British Army Jeep with an Irish lass. We went through the desert. It was very exciting going through the desert. It was just like being in a big bowl. It's like being in a saucer. I mean, you look around, you just see the horizon above you all the way. There are no sand dunes. Sand dunes are only on the edge of the desert. They're not in the main. The main desert is just a hardened piece of soil, right? The wind blows from the east to the west, from the west to the east, and it forms little ridges that you've got to try and avoid, right? It is so hot that by 10 o'clock you cannot drive. Right, you have to put blankets over the Jeep. You try and find somebody to keep cool. Your jerry cans of water have become hot. You can't drink them, just even though they're inside. So we went through this, and you could cook, by the way, on the bonnet of your Jeep. You fry eggs on the bonnet of your Jeep. It's amazing, right? So you'll understand it. Now we get through this. We come into Mali and places like that, and we start seeing people again, okay? And we start seeing trees and vegetation, water. And we came to the one big river there. I don't remember its name, and there's a village. And you get villages about every 50 kilometers, maybe less. And we got to the village, and there were four of us. There was myself and Michelle, myself and the one I was with, and then Roger and Michelle, the French couple, who we teamed up with. They were in their little Citroen. We come to the river. We're on a hill looking down to it, slightly above it. And we water. We just got out of our vehicles. We raced down there, dived into the water, and it was so refreshing. So
I'm sure.
We were surrounded by African tribes, the African villages. There wasn't a white person in much. There was no thought of fear in our minds. There was no thought that we were going to be beheaded and eaten for lunch. There was no thought. They were all smiling. We were just human beings. Didn't matter that one was black and one was white, okay? And our instinct was to get into the water. So we did this, and we went back to the car, and we had what we call Persil soap in those days. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Persil, it was a washing powder. Persil, that was a big washing powder. It's still in the UK to this day. and we had boxes in the car, right? So we went and grabbed one of the boxes, and we came back, and we put a little bit in our hands, and we were all sort of bathing. We were still clothed there, but we were washing ourselves down. And first time we'd done this in about 10 days, right? So it was like being in heaven. Well, the native villagers were so fascinated, right? And they were all there, kids and adults, with their hands out like this. They all wanted it. We cleaned out about 5 boxes of Persil,
Great.
right? Uh, um, and we had such a great time with all the villagers down in the water with us, all having a bath, all smiling and laughing, and none of us could understand each other. And we had a great time. When we got back to the car, there was one little mascot I had. It was one of these little gargoyle type plastic creatures that I don't know where I picked it up. It just stuck in there. It was just one of those good luck charms. I wouldn't do it today, but then it never thought twice about it. That had disappeared, right? It's the only thing that disappeared out of everything in that Jeep, right? Some little child, someone looked at it and said, oh, I like that. Exactly the same way I'd looked at it and said, oh, I like that. I'm going to stick it on my mascot as a mascot on my Jeep. They had exactly the same thing, and they took it. We didn't feel any badness about it. Everything else was totally safe. So if you look at that story and you look at two same species but different, one's black and one's educated and one's white and so on, right? All of this fell away. All of this fell away naturally. There was just no thought of these could be enemies, or we're going to be tied up and they're going to dance and boil us and so on. None of that kicked in. And that's what I'm trying to say is I think it's a natural thing within us, which is pushed down all the time, which is by society, by the world that we live in. Okay. But every so
I would
often.
agree. I think that if you want to talk on spiritual level, I think one of the first commandments God ever gave was when he created us was to say, you take care of the earth and she'll take care of you.
Absolutely.
And told husbands and wives to take care of themselves too. And that was the start of the whole human race. But so I think what I'm trying to highlight, I guess, what comes out as an understanding for me is that if it's not like in that situation where you were um, comfortably sharing the parcel and having this amazing interaction, nobody was going to get compromised by the interaction. But
Yes.
say, for example, like with the lion and the oryx, both of them were compromised by this interaction. Neither
Yes.
of them could survive with the stronger one looking after the weaker one at that stronger one's expense. So I think even sometimes we might have an inclination to look after somebody that's weaker or more vulnerable, but we can only do that in a truly loving way if it's not
Yes.
at our expense, not at
Yes.
our not in a way that would compromise us being able to look after ourselves. Because if we compromise being able to look after yourself or you abandon looking after yourself, there's no ways you're going to have the ongoing
Yes.
resources
True.
to look
True.
after someone else. So I think that was a very valuable understanding I gained from the interaction between this lion and oryx.
Yes. Yes. I like that. I think very much so. So you're saying that, if I'm right, if I understand you, you're saying that basically you need to be able to look after yourself as well in order to be able to look after the weaker.
Yeah, I think if we go back to, because a lot of your language is from a spiritual perspective, and I like that. I think if we go back to that place in the Bible where it says first all the commandments, all the do's and don'ts are replaced by just two. One is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul,
Absolutely.
mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you don't know how to love yourself, you're going to be hopeless at loving your neighbor. If you compromise looking after yourself, you're not going to be able to look after your neighbor. So if we took that back into a bush
Yeah.
situation, if you were charged by a lion or a elephant or a rhino, there's no possibility of looking after somebody else in that situation. You just got to get up out of the way, up the first
Yes.
tree as fast as possible. If you turn around and try to help somebody else, you'll probably both be taken out. So maybe that's just kind of the bush parallel to the life parallel.
It. Yeah. You're right. I like what you're saying there. I I mean, the reason I guess I talk more from a spiritual angle. I mean, I wasn't spiritual at that time. I had no thoughts whatsoever. So I think what
Sure.
happened was natural. But I
Sure.
think that's what I'm saying. It is a natural thing within us, but
Sure.
we've dampened it down. But again, coming back to your thing there, where you say you've got to look after yourself and not compromise yourself. Again, unfortunately, or fortunately, or unfortunately, I think that often that gets thrown out the window as well. And again, we've got another young ranger who took a party out. It's about 2, 3 years ago into the bush, and they were charged by a lion. And they say that if you clap your hands and stand your ground, the lion will stop ultimately. In
Sure.
fact, I think they say that 99 times out of 100, it will actually stop and turn and go away. The
Sure.
trouble is, you never know when that 100th time is. Okay, but he stood there, made all the noise, waved all these things, and he was taken out by the lion and killed. But the people were saved.
Sure.
So again, it's an instinct thing. But I think your principle is correct. Yes, you do. It's all very well to go and look after the weaker, but you can't compromise your own system. There's got to be a certain amount of looking after yourself and being able to keep your strength so that you can help the others.
Sure.
Otherwise, you
I
both
think,
compromise and it's out.
no, sure. I think when making parallels, so when learning, like gaining life insights from nature, I think we always have to keep in mind what are important aspects for the survival of different species. So, for example, we wouldn't say, for example, when male lions go in and eat all the calves, we wouldn't say the same thing for humans. We wouldn't say, okay, in a remarriage situation, the husband goes and kills off the kids.
What's
Something
for
like
dinner
that.
tonight? Well, I'm cooking John. I'm leaving Sarah for tomorrow.
But also, when you're in the bush, you have to know how each species operates when we come into their comfort zone. So if you advance beyond what is a lion's comfort zone, the worst thing is to turn around and flee, because that's what lions are used to doing. That's what all um, feline predators are used to doing. They're used to running after a prey that's trying to get
Yes,
away.
yes,
So as
yes,
soon as you turn around and run, it instinctively says, well, that's the prey.
yes,
Whereas obviously, if you stand your ground and clap or shout or whatever, it normally, obviously, they'd come too far into the comfort zone, or that lion couldn't get
mm,
out
mm,
comfortably,
mm.
because I think they would normally rather withdraw than attack,
Yeah,
unless they were
yeah,
absolutely starving. Whereas, for example, with the rhino, if you stood there and clapped your hands instead of running, well, you're going to be trampled all over. Same with the buffalo. So always when applying life insights from nature, we always have to bear in mind the different motivations for which different animals do things, because that's part of how they survive. That's part of how they adapt to their own environment.
So I think, yeah, in a summation of that, I think that yes, you're 100% correct. I think that a lot of what you're talking about is natural instincts within us. We're talking about natural instincts either way, and I think I personally believe that again, in certain circumstances, the bad natural instincts, also the desire for survival, which is a natural instinct, will be overtaken by the desire to help, right? Not necessarily at all costs. So, like the lion's natural instinct was to eat the buck, right? But the maternal instinct took over. So I think that I don't think you see that often, as often as it should happen, right? But I think it is there because, it's probably a more powerful instinct,
I
but the
think
but the survival.
Yeah, I think it is unusual, but I think because obviously, even if you were traveling in an airplane, they always say put on your own mask before you help the person next to you.
Yes,
So
yes,
it would not be towards the survival of that lioness to normally have her mothering instincts
absolutely.
take over
Yes, yes,
to look
yes,
after the species
yes,
that they would normally eat. I mean, that wouldn't be normal because it wouldn't be adaptive for their survival. If all lionesses did that, there would not be any lionesses left.
yes,
But
yes. Oh, yeah.
in abnormal situations, so for that lioness, it was an abnormal situation that she was left stranded from her pride. as a young lioness. So, in abnormal situations, it also changes how we perceive things and our mental preparation for life, I guess. And I think that's also something we could very much say is the same for humans. When we've been through abuse, when we've been through abandonment or neglect, when we haven't had the normal caring of parents or the normal caring of a community, we often develop mindsets in how we approach life that are a bit maladaptive for our own survival and are often cause distraction to people, to ourselves, to around us. So I think this is also an example of that in the end, it seems like her mindset uh, kind of came right in that she ate the seventh oryx. But and maybe the same for us, with time and with nurturing and with healthy things coming into what might have started as a maladaptive, abusive situation. We also have the same hope that we will realign ourselves into our normal ways of loving, caring, surviving in a healthy, procreative kind of way.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, no, I'd go with that.
Okay, well, very interesting discussion. So, Mike, thanks for all your thoughts and for all your
Pleasure.
life stories. We're really appreciated and look forward to having you on a weekly wilderness webinar on another occasion. And maybe look forward to finding another interesting wildlife interaction for us to learn from. Okay,
Fantastic. Yeah, it was a pleasure being here. I really enjoyed it. It was a great. I think it was a great little video clip to watch, and it's very thought provoking. Mandy, thank you very much.
pleasure, Mike, pleasure.